You never really know someone until they put a knife in your back and smile while they do it. For most of my life, I believed in loyalty. I believed in brotherhood. And most of all, I believed in him and Derek, my best friend since middle school. The guy who had my back in every fight, who showed up for every heartbreak, who stood beside me at my wedding as my best man. We built everything together, dreams, business plans, memories. When I launched my startup, he was the first person I called. We spent nights drinking cheap beer, coding till 3 a.m. talking about how we'd conquer the world. I thought we were unstoppable. But the funny thing about trust, it blinds you. It makes you miss the signs, the small lies, the missed calls, the way his eyes would flicker whenever I mentioned her. Her name was Emily, my wife, my reason to keep pushing through sleepless nights. I trusted her as much as I trusted him. And together, they burned everything I ever believed in. It started with little things. She was always busy, and he was just helping her with something. Late nights turned into project deadlines. And when I walked into our shared office one night I wasn't supposed to be there, I saw the truth. To people I loved most in this world, half naked, whispering the kind of words I thought were meant only for me. I froze. My chest went numb. And in that single moment, everything I knew about life, friendship, love, loyalty shattered like glass. They didn't even notice me. And I didn't make a sound, because revenge, the kind that really matters, doesn't come from rage. It comes from silence, from patience, from making sure every piece falls exactly where you want it to. That night, I walked away, quietly, calmly, but inside me, something dark woke up as something I didn't know I was capable of. It whispered, "You'll make them pay, but you'll do it your way." And that's exactly what I planned to do. The morning after that night, I didn't confront them. I didn't scream. I didn't even text either of them. I went to work like nothing happened, because that's what killers do before they strike. They blend in. Inside, my world was collapsing. But outside, I smiled, laughed, and shook hands like a man untouched by betrayal. Every "hey bro" from Derek, every fake kiss from Emily, it was gasoline on the fire quietly burning in my chest. I started taking notes, watching patterns. Every text she sent, every meeting he attended. I became an observer of my own life, attached, analytical, cold. That's when I realized something. If I wanted revenge, it couldn't just be emotional. It had to be surgical, precise, irreversible. Derek and I co-owned the startup minus 50/50ths. He had access to our finances, our clients, our investors. Emily, on the other hand, managed our company's PR and social media. Together, they had control over everything that mattered to me. So, I decided to take control back, quietly. One line of code, one email, one seed of doubt at a time. I started by creating a shadow account, one that mirrored our business data. Every late night edit he made, every transfer, I documented. He thought he was clever, siphoning small amounts into an offshore account. Maybe he thought I was too busy, too trusting. But I saw every move. And Emily, she played her part beautifully. Her fake concern, her soft eyes, her whispered, "Are you okay, babe?" After long days at work. It was almost Oscar-worthy. But her eyes gave her away every time. That slight hesitation, that flicker of guilt she tried to hide with a smile. The more I watched, the calmer I became. I realized something terrifying. Revenge wasn't about rage anymore. It was about control. I began isolating Derek from our team, quietly turning people against him, hinting at inconsistencies, planting the idea that maybe he wasn't the reliable partner everyone thought he was. It didn't take long. People notice energy, and his guilt made him sloppy. Meanwhile, I played the victim in silence, smiling, joking, acting like the same guy I'd always been. Because nothing disarms a snake like making it believe you never saw its fangs. At home, I treated Emily like everything was fine. Breakfasts together, small talks, even dates. I wanted her comfortable, unaware of the storm forming behind her. But late at night, when she fell asleep, I'd watch her phone light up. "I miss you. Tomorrow, same place." He even used a nickname for her. Like I hadn't called her that for years. I wanted to burn everything down. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I waited. I built. I crafted. Revenge wasn't just about exposing them, it was about dismantling their lives the way they dismantled mine. Slowly, painlessly at first. Then all at once. And when I finally looked at myself in the mirror, calm eyes, steady breath, I didn't see a broken man anymore. I saw someone reborn. Someone dangerous. The storm was coming. And they wouldn't see it until it was far too late. There's a peculiar calm that settles over you when you switch from being hurt to being deliberate. It's a cold clarity, like the moment before a long breath. For weeks I moved through that clarity like a man in a suit of invisible armor, my anger still there, but wrapped in patience. The plan wasn't about spectacle. It was about inevitability, a chain of small, precise events that would leave no doubt who'd built them. I began with what I could touch without anyone noticing: reputations. Relationships, the everyday currency of trust. People at our startup trusted me because I'd earned it. I'd stayed late, covered for others, fixed the problems that should have been someone else's. That reputation became my tool. I used it gently, a word in the right ear, a casual question at the right table, an offhand remark that had a sting hidden underneath. Rumor is a butterfly that lands on 100 shoulders. It needs only one gust to take wing. Derek was the soft target because he was careless. The shame of what he'd done made him clumsy. Guilt leaks into emails, shows in hurried replies, colors meetings with attention that others notice long before they have the proof to name it. I watched him make micro mistakes and I let those mistakes breathe. I didn't push. I arranged for them to be seen. The junior designer who had once idolized Derek started mentioning missed deadlines. An investor, previously impressed with Derek's pitch, began to ask for more rigorous numbers. I let the whisper become a question, and the question become a request for paperwork. Paperwork is a merciless thing for anyone who thinks charisma can replace competence. At home, Emily's world was relationship theater, comforting words, practiced concern. The way she would smooth the tablecloth like she was smoothing any edge that might reveal the truth. I turned that performance into evidence, not with theatrics, but with the mundane. I kept copies of messages I'd seen. I noted times she left the house. And I traced patterns, the way certain phrases always preceded a late-night text. The way certain excuses repeated like a record stuck between verses. I made quiet logs for myself. For a man who had always loved spreadsheets and order, turning heartbreak into data felt perverse and disturbingly satisfying. But the most satisfying part of the work was not the gathering. It was the timing. If you want to break someone, don't smash the window. Remove the mortar from the wall. Crack one brick at a time until the whole thing leans. I started by undermining their little safety nets. Derek relied on friends to vouch for him. I let those friends overhear a comment or see an incongruence that would make them pause. Emily relied on her image in our social circle. I placed small, contextual things in places where people she trusted would find them and wonder. No accusations. No shouting. Only questions. People are cruel to questions. They plant seeds of doubt you don't need to water. There were nights I almost slipped. The primitive part of me wanted to confront them, to throw the photos on the table, to force an explanation from throats that had lied so easily. But I learned that anger is transactionally cheap and strategically worthless. I wanted them to lose more than dignity for a moment. I wanted them to lose the quiet infrastructure of their life: credibility, comfort, the easy deference that had let them act without fear. So I kept my mouth shut and kept the machine running. One early winter evening I triggered the first real rotation of the plan. Derek had been cozying up to a new client, a contact he'd name-dropped with too much flourish. I didn't attack the client. I simply illuminated a part of the story Derek had left in shadow. I forwarded a fragment of an old email thread, nothing explosive, just an inconsistency, to someone who had influence in that company. I signed it from an innocuous address and let the corporate equivalent of curiosity do the heavy lifting. The client asked questions. Their lawyer asked for documents. Derek scrambled. When you don't have the facts, you invent them, and inventing under pressure is a dangerous game. When Derek called me that night, his voice was brittle. "David, I don't know how this happened. I'm being rookied by a million people." I listened to the panic in his voice and felt something I'd not expected: a tiny, poisonous satisfaction, the taste of equilibrium. He had made me lose everything. Now the world would make him answer. I didn't hang up to gloat. I stayed present and let his words fray into nothing. Let him speak. Let him explain. Let him fail at explaining. Emily, too, began to stumble. She was used to using kindness as a cloak, offering sympathy at the right time, staging apologies that smoothed over things until the next betrayal. I turned that cloak into a noose by letting her trust others. I arranged for a mutual friend to accidentally find a message thread and react in a way that made Emily search for refuge and explanations. The friend did what any decent friend would, offered quiet counsel and suggested Emily might want to clear the air. The next thing she knew, our social group's easy invitations thinned. People who once leaned toward her now extended polite distance. Social exile is quiet and devastating. It makes a person rehearse guilt in empty rooms. Of course, this wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. I told myself that again and again. They had broken more than my heart. They had stolen trust and lace-rope promises that anchored every late night and every sacrifice. There is a moral calculus in revenge, dangerous because one side tends to feel far clearer than the other. I kept telling myself I was restoring balance, making the universe pay attention, but even as I orchestrated the fractures, I watched the collateral damage and felt the first twinges of regret. A young developer who once idolized Derek now feared for his position. An investor who'd taken a chance felt betrayed by us both. The web of consequence spread outward, and the neat schematic I'd drawn began to look messier at the edges. Every action rippled. Every ripple reached human faces I recognized. That recognition thinned my resolve for a night, then hardened it the next morning when I remembered the image I could not unsee. The sweetest part of all of it, the part that made the whole long, patient work feel worth it, was anticipation. Not of their suffering, but of that quiet moment when the scale actually tipped. When friends stopped making excuses, when investors pulled back a little, when Derek's confident voice shrank in a room, when Emily's smile felt like an implausible prop in a play no one wanted to attend. I wanted them to feel the same small, precise humiliation that had burned through me for months. I wanted them to know what it was to be rendered suddenly cold by a world that had seemed warm. 2 months in, the trap had teeth. Small losses, a missed meeting, a question from an investor, a comment in a group chat. I became larger. The pattern was starting to be visible. It wasn't yet a collapse. It was an infection. The important thing was that it seemed natural, not engineered. That's the difference between justice and spectacle. One feels like the world correcting itself. The other like a person taking the stage. There was still one move left, the one I'd saved like a final note. It wasn't public theatrics. It would be personal, devastating in its intimacy. I'd keep that to myself, a private justice for a private wound. But I didn't reveal it to anyone, not even on the rare nights when alcohol loosened my tongue. It was mine, as the betrayal had been. On the night I activated the final prelude, I stood in the dark of our bedroom, watching Emily sleep. She looked small, human, the woman I had once sworn to protect. For a flash, I felt my throat close with memory and wanted to reach out and wake her, to ask her to explain, to beg for something I had no right to ask. I did not. Instead, I went to the office the next morning with quiet shoes and a quiet voice, and I pressed the last key that set the sequence moving. The trap was set. The pieces were in place. The long quiet revenge I'd shaped out of heartbreak and focus waited like a breath in the chest, ready to be released. I wasn't sure if the release would make me whole. I only knew I no longer wanted the world that had let them hide in its corners. The rest of the fall, the reckoning, the bitter, sweet aftermath, belonged to the days that followed. The thing about a long, patient plan is that when it finally moves, it feels less like an explosion and more like gravity doing its work. You don't hear a trumpet. You hear floors creak and people rearrange themselves around an absence they didn't notice until it was too late. The morning it started to fall apart, Derek swaggered into the office like nothing had changed. He wore the same easy grin, the same tired charm, but the air around him was thinner. People had begun to look at him like a question. That look does. A kind of damage all on its own. It shrinks confidence in a way others never can. I didn't gloat. You don't gloat when you've done this long and carefully. You watch. You measure the angles. You let the world do what you arranged for it to do. The first call came from Rowan, an investor who'd backed us through our first shaky months. He asked for an urgent reconciliation of accounts. His tone was professional, but his words had that small tremor of a man who's been caught off guard. I sent the files I'd prepared in the dead hours clean, annotated, impossible to misread. Within an hour his email asked for a wider review. Within the day, other investors chimed in with the same requests. Pressure begets questions, questions beget records. Records make liars uncomfortable. That afternoon, a vendor who'd been quietly paid through an offshore account demanded clarification when payment failed to reconcile. He forwarded a copy of the invoice, the same invoice Derek had created months prior, to the legal team with a perfunctory, "Please advise." The legal team asked for backup documentation. Derek stammered explanations. He tried to produce authorizations. The authorizations were timestamps in a system that, thanks to my backups, showed editing from a laptop whose MAC address traced back to an address Derek didn't control. Little leaks became damning tides. Then came the client calls. One of our biggest clients, the one whose contract we'd won with Derek's polished tick, requested an emergency review meeting. The client's counsel was precise and cold. "We need assurance. We need an audit of all billing for Q1 and Q2. Their audit uncovered duplicate charges, creative line items, and a routing pattern that funneled small payments to a consultancy none of us had ever heard of." It all wound back to the same place Derek had been bragging about, his side relationship with a vendor. He had been taking small cuts under the pretense of consultation. Maybe he thought it was clever. He thought wrong. I watched Derek unravel in ways that would have been unbearable if not for the steel I'd wrapped around myself. He paced. He called friends. He tried to charm vendors into sliding silence back under their carpets. The more he tried, the more threads he pulled and exposed. There's a terrible irony in watching someone who used to make people feel safe become grasping with fear, like a man who has finally learned the difference between being liked and being trusted. Emily's collapse was different. Where Derek's was a public, flailing thing, hers was a soft, internal drowning. She'd always handled the social fabric, the friends, the charities, the polished brunches that made us look like a perfect family. As the distance between what she portrayed and what she'd done widened, people who'd once opened their lives to her began to step back. Invitations stopped. The PTA mails that used to ping her with ease now landed in red. When the first message from a photographer hit my inbox, a clipped, anonymous mail with a folder attached, my heart kicked. Inside were messages, yes, but more destructive were the proofs of coordination. Screenshots of DMs where Derek and Emily planned narratives, a spreadsheet showing amounts and dates, a list of accounts they'd hoped would be invisible. I didn't need to forward everything to anyone. I didn't need to make a spectacle of the most intimate pieces. I used them when leverage called for it, and I kept the rest like a cold blade in a drawer. The press found wind. Someone in our investor circle, alarmed by the numbers and the risk, asked a journalist to take a look. The journalist, hungry for something real, ran a careful piece that laid out facts without the melodrama. It quoted our chief compliance officer saying an internal review was ongoing. That was enough. The small, private drainage of dignity started being cataloged in public language. What was most satisfying, if satisfaction is the right word, was how neatly their defenses collapsed into one another. Amanda at the accounting firm we'd worked with called the legal team after noticing a pattern in a spreadsheet. A vendor demanded proof of services. A junior accountant volunteered to let his emails be searched. The team that had once rallied behind Derek's smooth pitches began, in whispers, to say the thing I'd been whispering in private rooms for months: we need transparency. They tried to pivot. Derek made statements, blamed a misconfiguration, called it a rogue process he'd regretted enabling. Emily went on the defensive, crying beneath the fluorescent lights in front of our mutual friends and claiming she'd been coerced into approving transfers as part of their business development strategy. Some believed them, others did not. People choose what is easiest to believe. In our world, the easiest thing was to treat it like a terrible mistake rather than malice. But the paper trail refused to be kind. I remember the day my lawyer called and said two words that landed with a physical weight: criminal referral. That's when I felt the axis shift. The problem was no longer just reputational, no longer just our tiny social world. They could face consequences that scraped clean the scaffolding of their lives. It was not something I wished with relish. It was something I had arranged when I kept my silence for months, watching them spin and lie and sleep. Derek reached out to me at 2 a.m. that night. His voice was broken clay. "Dove, I can fix this. I'll pay it back. I'll go to the accounts. He offered money like it was a sov. You can't buy trust with restitution. I listened, and let his words turn into the soft thrum of someone trying to bargain with a fate he'd created. Emily sent me a text the next morning that read like someone making a final plea. "Please, don't make this worse. We can talk. Come over." I read it twice, then 3 times. The woman who once whispered promises was now asking for mercy. I didn't go. I wanted to see them feel what I'd felt, the slow, sinking disbelief. I wanted their nights to be sleepless and their days filled with small, stinging questions. But there was another thing that uncoiled in me the closer they fell, the knowledge that their collapse would reach beyond them. It would touch employees, relatives, the interns who'd idolized Derek, and the moms who'd invited Emily to bake sales. It would land on people who had nothing to do with the sin that begot it. One evening, Emily called my office. Her voice was tiny. "Do you know what it feels like to watch everything go?" she asked, as if I might be spared the answer. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear, the hum of fluorescent lights in the background, and realized my victory tasted more and more like ash. The public motions intensified. Statements, investigations, temporary restraining orders over accounts. Derek's desk was cleared by security while he stood in the doorway, pale and emptied, like a man who'd woken up and realized the life was someone else's dream. Emily packed a bag, left the house, and later that week filed for a protective order that read more like a confession than a plea. They were taking actions to protect themselves from what they'd done and from what they'd stolen. I had won. The people who had taken from me had been unmade in the specific and excruciating ways I'd chosen. Amanda stopped returning texts from friends. Derek's number went dead in the investor Rolodexes. The startup we built together began to stand on new scaffolding while the ghost of what had been collapsed in on itself. And yet, as the dust settled, I found myself standing in the quiet of our living room, the phone silent on the table, and feeling a claustrophobic emptiness. The revenge had worked, but it had rearranged the topography of my life. There were few echoes left in the spaces I'd once filled with laughter. Friends who'd watched me from the sidelines began to look at me in a new way, with a mix of respect, unease, and a question they kept behind polite smiles. "What did it take to get you here?" That question haunted me more than Derek's pleading. It was the sound of someone recognizing that the man who could plan such a fall was no longer exactly the man they once knew. The image of Emily's face in the bedroom, small and hollow, followed me into dreams. I'd wanted them to feel the cold I'd felt. I hadn't known until that night how much of that cold would lodge in me too. I lay awake and realized something I'd refused to admit. A sweet revenge can still leave a bitter aftertaste. The fall had been satisfying. It had been precise, but satisfaction has a price. And the ledger I'd balanced carried entries that could never be erased.